So major spoilers for this week's episode of Star Trek Discovery, but in contrast to last week's episode where it felt like it was hugely important and pushed along all the major storylines, this episode was much more small scale and felt like your usual traditional Star Trek plot where it had the crew going to a pre-warp planet and having to stick to the Prime Directive and stuff like that. Pretty genuine Star Trek. The major advancement of the plot this week was that we, pretty out of nowhere, got the list kind of just dropped on us 5 minutes into the episode, and this was a bit of confliction for me. The names on that list were Jean-Luc, the Trill character that inhabited Culber earlier in the season, Velek, the Romulan character from the background of The Chase, Carmen Cho, who we found out about last episode and is a refugee from the Terran universe, with the final 2 names being brand new characters. Marina Derricks, who's a Betazoid, which that makes sense considering how often Beta Z was mentioned in the earlier parts of the season, and then Hideroshi Creel, who is a Denobulan, and this whole episode was about finding the clues that they left behind, which led Discovery to the planet of Helemno, where we met a brand new species called the Halemnites. I guess I am kind of surprised that this list didn't have any noticeable or major connections to characters we know of besides Velek, because I remember back in episode 3 when we found out about a group of Federation and non-Federation scientists from during the Dominion War that were working on the Progenitors mystery, my immediate thought was that we were going to find out that a very well-known character from either Next Generation or Deep Space Nine would maybe have been revealed to be a part of this mystery and this group. Like, I was kind of for sure expecting there to be at least one scientist from that era involved in this group. Especially since it was during the Dominion War, it would have been a cool way to explain why certain next-gen characters may not have been involved in the Dominion War, maybe what they were doing during that era, since a lot of the characters were never mentioned in Deep Space Nine during that time period. Not annoyed though, like, this was all just a little theory. One thing I am a little surprised about is that there wasn't a Klingon scientist involved. Like, if we say that Terrans are just essentially the stand-in for humans, and we already have a Romulan and Velek, then it would have been cool to be like, yeah, there was a Klingon working this too, kind of showcasing that the 3 big ancient enemies of Star Trek lore were working together, both during the Dominion War and also through science. The Helmite stuff was pretty solid though. I definitely feel like that whole story is something that maybe would have suited earlier on in the season much more, mainly because we've only got 4 episodes left after this week, and this feels like the kind of episode that sort of slows the mystery down a whole lot. To be fair to them though, they were not thinking about this as a final season yet, so they probably weren't thinking that they had to kind of rush more of a finality or more of a season along, but in terms of purely Discovery, this episode really reminded me of the second episode of Season 2, New Eden, which is one of my favourite episodes of the show, and it just reminds me of it because it follows that old traditional Star Trek story as well, of the crew beaming down and pretending to be part of the planet's inhabitants, and bringing up the Prime Directive arguments, and all that sort of stuff. Helemno also had that look that I mentioned a few episodes ago, where the planet is just one big giant forest, which is kind of Discovery's go-to when it comes to alien planets because of where they shoot. It's either a quarry or a forest, but it was fine, it worked for the episode. Now, I really liked the idea of the race to the summit that they were doing. It provided a very sort of dramatic free way to learn about this species and get an insight into who they are and what they're about. Like, the whole marathon race thing made them memorable, which I think was really smart. When they first started coughing before the race started and the main guy was talking about sacrifice, I was already thinking about what if this is a cult and everyone is supposed to die here. And then it turned into a kind of fun race sequence, and I was like, oh, this isn't some crazy high stakes, I kind of like this. And then we got the reveal later on that nope, this is very culty and they want to sacrifice themselves to gods. Surprise, surprise. In terms of the race, I think it really worked to have Michael fall out of it quickly because it helped push the plot along, but I'm not super into the idea of Tilly being the person who ended up winning the race, and this isn't a slight on her character. I would have felt the exact same way about any single Discovery character winning this race. Like, I think that none of the non-Helmanites should have won this race because the summit is supposed to be a huge deal for this species and the planet, and I feel like this is the kind of thing that the locals train for or work towards for months and maybe years. So to me, for an outsider, that to just, I guess, waltz in and beat all of them doesn't really work, especially when the locals will be more used to the climate, the terrain, probably already trained doing endurance and no water tests for months and months. I think just a much stronger storyline would maybe have been to do the opposite of what actually happened, which is Tilly just about loses to the Helmanite woman, but she decides to share her victory with Tilly. Because I don't know, I think it's a bit strange to have characters that would have never trained in this climate, in this terrain, in all of that, kind of just come in and easily dispatch every other person from the planet who's actually trying to win this race. Like, that's a little strange to me. Now, this episode had a lot of really cool visual looks to it. The whole CGI shots of Helemno looked amazing, as well as the great shots of Discovery in orbit of the planet, but in terms of traditional directing, I feel like this episode has some really unusual shots in terms of what Discovery usually goes for. Like, the episode starts with this complete darkness inside engineering, and then we have the clue from last episode sort of lighting Michael, Tilly, and Paul's faces with these interesting and bright colours, and so we have really close-up shots just with the colours lighting the scene, and I thought that was really creative creative and a very new and fresh way for what the show usually goes for shot-wise. Likewise, the final scene focusing on Book on board his ship had a lot of really interesting close-ups on Book and on the game he was playing that just felt like a new visual style for the show that we don't see utilized very often. Like, I really appreciated that. The directing for the whole episode was also just, in general, really well done. I'd love to see some more of what we see here in the following episodes. Overall, though, there is not a crazy lot I have to say about the episode. We got a new clue. Mal and Locke have been found, so we'll be chasing them next episode. But other than that, there wasn't really much movement on the overall story and plot at all. And I feel like this has been Discovery's style for this season, where it's one episode that is very plot heavy, the following episode being more traditional wacky Star Trek. Like episode 4, we had the time jumping episode all going through Discovery's past. That all felt very similar to Voyager. I'm glad we have the scientists' names now, and we'll probably be looking into the Betazoid scientists soon to fill out that overall list. I am surprised Velek wasn't a bigger mystery or a bigger part of the season. Like, it's kind of clear now that he was just meant to be the first piece of the puzzle, because we haven't went back to that scene since the very first episode. But Star Trek Discovery, Season 5, Episode 6, have you seen it yet? What did you think about it? Like it, hate it, let me know all of that. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. Lots of Star Trek videos and other nerdy things. Make sure to like and share to somebody you think might like it. But thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video and have an amazing day.